And the Hall of Famer himself, the great Peter Gammons from the Major League Baseball Network. Is it more about who's going in or who's not going in, Pete?
Dan, that's a great point. I mean, I actually think that here we have, in some ways, one of the most electrifying classes of all time. And we have a very good chance that nobody will get in. And that's really the story. And, how it moves forward from this year on to next year and the ensuing years. But I think that that's going to be the real issue is not whether or not Craig Biggio or Alan Trammell or someone like that or Jack Morris gets in. I think it's going to be what happens if nobody gets in. I think the odds are pretty good it's going to happen.
You don't think anybody gets in?
I think there's a real good chance. I think Biggio has a chance. I think Morris. But I don't think Piazza will first time. So I think that if it isn't Biggio or Morris, I think that there's a very good chance that we're going to see a lineup with, a guy that is, the all-time home runs leader, one of the 3 or 4 greatest right-handed pitchers of all time, a guy that has hit 60 home runs 3 times, all not get in, and I think that's going to be the story. And how does everyone come to grips with the steroids era? I think in time there will be some peace, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. Of course, I hope that a couple of these guys make it, but I don't think it's a bad thing that we have a little bit of a step back and say, okay, let's have a year or 2 or 3 years to completely come to grips with Bonds, Clemens, et cetera. And I think that the damage this summer of, let's say, the Bonds and Clemens both get voted in today, I think it could get very ugly in Cooperstown at the end of July. I think it could be embarrassing not only for Major League Baseball and for the Hall, which is so important to the game, but I just think that, you probably have the majority of Hall of Famers would not show up. I think it would be extremely divisive. And unfortunately, that still comes from the fact that we haven't really come close to any unanimity on the era.
I think you bring up a great point. You bring it up far better than I did. I just said I think the Hall of Fame is in trouble right now. This is a tipping point here. And you got the old school, these guys who look at these guys, they cast aspersions. They look at them as guilty. And now all of a sudden, they're in the Hall of Fame. And I could see where there would be, if it's a silent protest, maybe you get these old-timers who get in there and, things that they have to say about these guys coming in. If it's Bonds or Clemens, Piazza, whoever it might be, Sammy Sosa, Rafael Palmeiro, I do see old school, new school. And I think it will be a bigger problem for the Hall of Fame as years go on.
I do, too. And I do think I raised this question to someone this morning. Which is worse, having no one get voted in and therefore have a somewhat somber and necessarily creative celebration at the end of July, or 2, 3, 4 of these players getting voted in and having the majority, say 40 of the established Hall of Famers, refuse to go to Cooperstown? That's a good question. It really is.
I think if you have no one getting in, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But, I look at the list here, Pete, and I'm glad I don't have to vote here because it's difficult. I look at Piazza, and I just have to look at what he did numbers-wise. There can be whispers, innuendo, same thing with Bagwell. There's a couple of guys on here, but I can't play judge and jury here, and that's what we're asking you guys to do. And God forbid somebody gets in, and all of a sudden we find out that they did use, then what do you do?
Well, I think people are terrified of that. But it's unfortunately, it comes with the territory, it comes with the era. I said something to somebody yesterday, and that's Bud Selig's. No, it's not Bud Selig's fault. It's a very complex problem, all that evolved out of the 90s. But
don't you put the blame, Pete, on the Players Association? Remember, it's only 5% was dirty, and I said these guys, they're fooling everybody. That they protected the 95% who were dirty. And it was the 5% who were clean. Remember Donald Fear, that they wouldn't let you test him. Invasion of privacy and all that. Bud Selig wanted to test him.
Absolutely.
He couldn't.
And for the good of the game, in 2002, there was a showdown coming. And Commissioner Seelig, for the good of the game, said, all right, we'll modify the attempts at drug testing. That's when they agreed to, okay, if 5% test positive, then we'll have drug testing. But he knew that another strike, and it was a strikeable, it was an issue that would have caused a strike. That the game couldn't afford another strike coming, whatever it was, 8 years off the last strike, and he was absolutely right for the good of the industry. But he was in a no-win situation. I mean, there was no absolute right in that decision to go forward and get that agreement done. I think it was Labor Day weekend of 2002.
Who'd you vote for?
I voted for Bagwell. I voted for Piazza. I voted for Kurt Schilling. I voted for Biggio. I voted for Tim Raines, Alan Trammell, who I still feel very strongly about. I voted for Larry Walker because I want to see him stay on the ballot and kind of study what are the real ramifications of playing in Denver. Should he be punished for playing there? Because he was a great player, as you know.
In Montreal.
And in Montreal as well. And, I think one of the underrated, Dan O'Dowd has talked about this a lot, is one of the underrated problems with playing in Denver is you get so used to the ball not really moving. You get out on the road and balls are running all over the place and you can't hit them. You play under two very difficult, very different games, and it's hard enough to hit when you have to hit two different ways.
Talking to Peter Gammons, Major League Baseball Network. They go on the air coming up at 12 Eastern. The announcement will be at 2 Eastern. If I ran down the list here, just yes or no, Pete, if they get in any time, because Verducci was pretty strong on what he said. He said that Palmeiro, never. Sosa, never. So I'll just have you say yes or no as we go down the list. Bagwell?
Yes.
Biggio?
Yes. And I think he has a chance to make it this year.
Bonds?
Yes, he will eventually.
Clemens?
Yes. Can't have the Hall of Fame without Bonds and Clemens. I mean, somewhere down the line.
Edgar Martinez?
No.
Don Mattingly?
I voted for him, too.
Don Mattingly?
No.
Fred McGriff?
No, and I regret that.
He should be in.
Just as I really regret seeing Dale Murphy go off the ballot, which he probably will today. I don't think he ever got a fair shot. Someone pointed out, it might have been Tom or somebody else, I think, in a meeting today, pointed out that when they've all went on the ballot, that actually that Dale Murphy was way ahead of both Jack Morris and Bert Blyleven, and which is really interesting.
Mark McGwire?
Yes.
Jack Morris?
No. I think that that 3.90 ERA and the sabermetrics will keep him out.
Yeah, it's a shame. It really is, because he pitched to the scoreboard, and that you know these guys now all about their stats. Jack Morris was all about getting a win. So
I'm not sure that the best piece written about the Hall of Fame and one player in the last 2 years wasn't Tom Verducci's piece on Jack Morris getting to the ninth inning so much more than anybody else, and what that means. And I read it and I was thinking, I remember talking at length to Mike Scioscia and Jerry DiPoto last summer when the Angels were struggling for 5 weeks. And the fact is that what looked like a good starting staff was either hurt or underperforming, and they were always being out of the game in the fourth, fifth, or sixth innings.
Yep.
Their bullpen became overtaxed, and that's why they didn't make the playoffs.
Rafael Palmeiro?
No.
Mike Piazza?
Yes.
Tim Raines?
Yes.
Kurt Schilling?
Yes.
Lee Smith?
No.
Sammy Sosa?
No.
Alan Trammell?
No, unfortunately.
Larry Walker?
No.
Bernie Williams?
No.
We'll be watching today, Pete. Always good to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I appreciate it.
All right. Peter Gammons, Major League Baseball Network.